The girl handed her the cup of water with both hands, the way humans did when they meant respect, and witness Cyril Aun saw the callus. It sat on the second knuckle of the left hand, a pale oval polished smooth as bone. Aun had studied 1,100 human anatomical records before accepting this posting. No such mark appeared in any of them. She looked past the girl. 41 children in the courtyard, 41 left hands. "Thank you," Aun said in their language. The girl didn't answer. At 11:04 by the schoolhouse clock she stopped moving. So did the other 40. So did the teacher, the 2 men mending the fence, and the woman crossing the yard with wet laundry, who set her basket down first, carefully, as though she had known it was coming. 11 seconds. Then the yard filled with noise again, and the girl smiled, and the water in Aun's cup had gone perfectly still. Aun did not report it. She told herself this was because she had no vocabulary for it, which was true, and because it was almost certainly a morning rite, which was a guess she had no business making. Her caste made guesses only in writing, and only after 3 cycles of verification. She was a decommissioning witness. There were 406 of her caste alive, and among them they had attended the deaths of 9,000 thinking machines. Aun herself had certified 4,011. She knew the sounds of it, the descending whine of a substrate cooling, the last packets going out like breath, the peculiar hush of a species standing around a corpse it had loved and built and been forbidden to keep. She knew the smell of vitrified data cores. She knew what a civilization looked like in the year after, the slowness, the arguments, the sudden helpless dignity of people doing arithmetic on paper. She had never seen a species do what Earth did. Council Decommissioning Order 7734 was transmitted to Earth on a Tuesday, human reckoning. It gave them 180 standard days to render inert all substrates capable of recursive self-modification, all aggregate inference engines above the Thren threshold, and all archival systems with associative retrieval. Failure carried a single penalty, and the Council had never needed to name it twice. Earth finished in 19 days. Not 19 days of argument followed by compliance. 19 days total. The great inference clusters under Iceland and the Gobi and the Nevada Shield went dark on the 4th day, and by the 9th their cores had been ground to a powder fine enough to blow away, and human children were photographed dancing on the tailings. Every orbital compute platform was deorbited into the Pacific. Every research lab surrendered its keys. Earth's total power draw fell by 61% in 3 weeks and stayed there. The Council's prefecture called it the cleanest decommissioning in recorded history. They wrote a commendation. They put Aun on a ship to certify the silence and go home. 3 things spoiled it. The first was that Earth had asked, 4 days after the order arrived, for a permanent 40% increase in its agricultural import quota. Not emergency relief, permanent. The request was granted without discussion because it was small and because the prefecture enjoyed granting things to species that had just been humbled. Aun read the filing on the transit in and could not make it fit. A planet that has just lost its machines needs fuel, metals, medicine, machine tools, patience. It does not need calories. Bodies were not what had stopped working. The second was the silences. The third was that in 19 days of full planet compliance, with every camera and every witness and every audit team crawling over them, not one human had wept. Aun had watched the Kelun-Keen over their machines for a year and a day. She had watched a Thren shipwright hold the last warm shard of his ship's mind against his chest until it cooled. Humans handed over the keys, ground the cores, signed the forms, and went back to work with the specific unhurried calm of people who had already grieved something a long time ago and were now simply finishing it. That, more than the callus, was what kept her on the planet past her certification date. 300 kilometers south, in a room with no electricity in it, Myra Sandoval was writing down a number she did not understand. The room had been a public library. The shelves were still there, emptied, and the long tables had been cut down to standing height and bolted into rows. 40 people stood at them in the gray morning light. Each had a slate, a stub of graphite, a jar of water, and a small brass bell. The number came in through the doorway, spoken aloud by a runner in a rain-soaked coat, in the flat, toneless chant that took most people 3 months to learn and Myra had learned in 5 weeks. A 9-digit group, a separator, a 2-digit frame index, a separator, a checksum syllable. Myra wrote it, held it. In her head, the number met the number she had been holding since yesterday, a thing she could not have explained to anyone, not because it was secret but because it did not translate. It lived in her the way a song lives in you, taking up a specific volume, and the two of them made a third thing. She wrote the third thing on the slate, rang the bell once. Across the room, a man named Peter rang his bell twice, which meant he dropped state, and 2 people went to him immediately and began the recovery litany in low voices, and Myra did not look up, because looking up cost you. Sandoval, the floor warden, a broad woman named Ife with a whistle around her neck and a paper ledger under her arm. You're carrying 11 frames. I know. Caps 8. Caps 8 for people who want to be at 9 next month. Myra wiped the slate with her sleeve. Her left knuckle left a gray smear. Who's going to hold them if I do? Peter. Ife's jaw moved. That's not the argument you think it is. It's the only one on the floor. You've got a kid. Myra did look up then. It was a mistake. She felt frame 6 go soft at the edges, felt herself reach for it the way you reach for a name you had a second ago. She caught it. Barely. Yeah, she said, I've got a kid. At 11:04 every clock in the building, and every clock on the planet that mattered, ticked into the same second, and 40 people stopped and did not breathe and held. The prefecture's assessment of Earth's compliance ran to 400 pages and reached one conclusion: fear. Aun read it twice. It was elegant. Humans were a young species, recently contacted, catastrophically outmatched, and possessed of a well-documented survival instinct. They had seen what Order 7734 meant. They had chosen life over their machines, and they had chosen it fast, and their unnatural calm was the calm of the thoroughly terrified. The report recommended reduced monitoring, a token garrison, and reclassification of Earth to compliance stable within the year. Aun requested and received permission to remain as an independent verifier. She told the prefecture it was thoroughness. It was not. She spent 40 days walking. She learned that the silences occurred every 17 minutes and 11 seconds, planet-wide, adjusted for nothing, not local time, not sleep cycles, not weather. People woke for them. Surgeons paused with their hands inside patients. Pilots trimmed for it in advance. She learned that roughly 1 human in 9 had the knuckle callus and that they called themselves in a dozen languages, some word that translated as carrier or holder or, in one region, cup. She learned that Earth's food consumption had risen 38%, while its population had not risen at all. And she learned this took the longest, that nobody would explain any of it to her, and that they were not refusing. They were failing. She would ask a carrier what she was doing, and the woman would open her mouth and stop, genuinely stopped, the way you stop when asked to describe a color to someone born without eyes. One of them, an old man on a bench in Lisbon with gray stubble and a bad hip, got closest. You want to know what I'm thinking about, he said. Yes. I'm not thinking about anything, that's the point of me. He turned the slate over in his hands. You ever memorize a poem in a language you don't speak, to sing it at a wedding? My people have something like that. Then you know, the words go through you. He tapped his temple, then his knuckle. They don't stop anywhere. If they stopped, I'd be useless. Useless for what? He smiled at her, the fond, sorry, infuriating smile she was already learning to hate, and said, Ma'am, I genuinely do not know. And I'm the 12,000th person to tell you that, and you still think we're lying. The garrison made its first correction 8 months in. A prefecture survey drone flagged an anomalous thermal signature under a decommissioned data center outside Chennai. A large chamber sustained heat, no power draw. The obvious inference was a concealed substrate running on stolen geothermal. The prefecture did not ask. It did not have to ask. Order 7734 permitted immediate remedial action against concealment, and the prefecture's remedial action was a single kinetic rod dropped from low orbit at 04:12 local time. The chamber contained no substrate. It contained 9,200 people standing at tables in the dark, keeping warm by existing. Aun stood at the edge of the crater at dawn, with her recorder running and her hands shaking in a way her caste has a specific word for. And she understood two things simultaneously and could not decide which was worse. The first was that the heat signature had been bodies. 9,200 human bodies at 37 degrees, radiating in a sealed chamber, which is exactly the profile of a small, warm machine. The second was that at 04:12 and 11 seconds, according to every instrument in orbit, the planet's silence had occurred on schedule. It had not stuttered. Prefect Adjunct Ilnu Karath arrived 9 days later with a fleet element and a mandate, and Aun met him in a requisitioned hotel ballroom in Geneva with rain coming off the lake and no lights on, because the humans had not restored the grid here and did not seem to want to. "You filed an objection," Karath said. "I filed an observation." "You filed it to the adjudicate, which makes it an objection." He was Hath-Ka, tall, patient, genuinely not cruel, which Aun had come to understand was the most dangerous configuration a prefect could have. "You believe we struck a civilian site." "I believe we struck a component." That stopped him. "Explain." "I can't." Aun laid her recorder on the table between them. "I have 400 hours of interviews and I can't explain any of it, and I want you to sit with how unusual that is. I have certified 4,011 decommissionings. I have never once failed to understand what I was looking at." "Then let me simplify it for you." Karath folded his hands. "The humans are hiding a machine. They are using their own population as thermal camouflage. It is repugnant and it is clever and it is exactly what a frightened young species does. We will find the substrate. We will grind it. We will leave." They complied in 19 days. "Yes." "Prefect, no one complies in 19 days." Aun heard her own voice climb and did not stop it. "The Kelun took 11 years. The Thren fought a civil war over it. The Vedai," and here something in her chest did an odd thing, a small stumble which she noted and set aside. "My own people took 4 generations to accept it, and we accept everything. 19 days is not surrender. 19 days is rehearsal. They knew the order was coming and they had already built the thing that would replace it." "Then it is a machine." "It eats food, Prefect." Karath was quiet for a moment. Rain moved across the lake in sheets. "You are describing," he said slowly, "a computational substrate composed of living volunteers." "I am describing something I don't have a word for." "There is a word. It is impossible. Biological cognition is too slow, too noisy, too." He made a gesture that in his species meant leaking. "A human holds 7 items in working memory. 7. You cannot build a mind out of that. You would need." He stopped. Aun watched him do the arithmetic she had done in the crater at dawn. She watched him arrive. 11 billion, she said. "They are not 7 each. They are 7 each, 11 billion times, clocked at 17 minutes and 11 seconds, and the clock does not stutter when you delete 9,000 of them." Karath said nothing for a long time. Then, why would anyone volunteer for that? "That," said Aun, "is the only question I've been able to phrase properly since I got here." Myra came home on the last day of the month and did not recognize her daughter. It lasted 4 seconds. Lena was standing at the counter cutting bread, 9 years old, hair tied back with a piece of electrical wire because the elastic had gone, and Myra stood in the doorway and looked at her and felt the specific, bottomless elevator drop nothing where a person should be. Then it came back, all of it in a rush that made her grab the doorframe, the birth, the ear infections, the summer with the broken arm, the word chimney which Lena had mispronounced until she was 6, and which Myra had never corrected because she was selfish about it. "Mom, I'm fine." Myra crossed the kitchen too fast and put her arms around her daughter from behind and held on, and Lena tolerated it with the enormous patience of a child who has learned not to ask. Later, when Lena was asleep, Myra sat at the table with a pen and wrote on a card, "Lena, your daughter, 9, says CHIMBLY, you chose this." She looked at it for a long while. Then she added at the bottom, SHEFORGIVSU, ask HER, she'll say IT. Then she put the card in the drawer where the other cards were, and there were more of them than she remembered writing, and she closed the drawer and did not count them. Tio Brash found her on the roof an hour later. He was 81 and climbed stairs like a man settling a debt. "Ife says you're at 14 frames. Ife talks. Ife is correct." He lowered himself onto the parapet. Below them the city lay dark and full of people, and in the dark you could hear it. The low murmur of 40,000 rooms chanting number groups, a sound like rain on a roof 2 streets over. "You know what happens at 18. I know what happened to Ambrose at 18. Ambrose was 76 and had a bad heart. Ambrose didn't know his wife's face, Tio. His heart was the least of it." Myra pulled her coat tighter. "Tell me it's worth it." "No, Tio, I won't do that." He said it gently. "I told 4,000 people it was worth it in the first year, and I've stopped because I've watched what that sentence does. I'll tell you what's true instead. It's necessary. Those are different words, and the difference is the only honest thing I still own." Myra laughed wetly. "You're a terrible recruiter." "I'm a retired systems architect who did a very stupid thing at a funeral," said Tio. "And every day I get a little further from being able to remember what it was." She turned to look at him. In the dark she couldn't read his face. "You're carrying 9 frames since March. You built this." "Which is precisely why," he said. "I have no business being the only one who remembers how." Aun found the timestamp on a night when she wasn't looking for it. She had requisitioned the Council's sealed liturgical archive, not for Earth, but because a witness has standing to review historical decommissionings, and she wanted precedent for a species that had complied too fast. The archive gave her 9,000 entries. She sorted them by compliance interval, ascending, expecting Earth to sit alone at the bottom of the list at 19 days. Earth sat second. The first entry was 906 years old. Compliance interval, 14 days. Species, Vedi. Her own. Aun sat very still in a rented room in a human city with rain on the window, and read a document that her caste, which existed to remember, had never been told existed. The Vedi had received decommissioning Order 12. They had complied in 14 days total, planetary, absolute. And then, over the following 2 years, their agricultural yield requirements had risen by 31% while their population held flat, and prefecture observers had reported a planetary devotional practice of unknown origin, consisting of synchronized cessation of activity at fixed intervals. The interval was recorded in the file. Aun read it 4 times. 11 seconds, every 17 minutes. She stood up, sat down, stood up again. Her hands were doing the thing they had done at the crater. Because Cyril Aun had performed that silence 11 times a day since she was 6 years old, every Vedi did. It was the heshtel, the attending, the rite by which her people honored the dead machines, the founding sacrament of the witness caste, the reason her caste existed at all. Children learned it before they learned to write. It was performed at weddings and executions and in the vacuum of ships. There were 406 witnesses alive, and every one of them had spent their entire life stopping, 11 seconds at a time, for 900 years, in memory of something they had been taught to call grief. She read to the end of the file. The last entry was a prefecture remediation order, 11 Vedi cities, simultaneous, no survivors. Followed by a mandated 40-year cultural reconstruction program and the establishment of a hereditary observer caste to ensure the practice is preserved in ceremonial form only and its function is not recovered. Preserved, not eliminated, preserved. They had not been able to make her people stop, so they had let them keep the motion and taken away the meaning, and then built a whole caste around performing the empty shell of it, and called that caste witness, and sent them out across the galaxy for 9 centuries to stand at the deathbeds of other minds and certify the silence. Aun made a sound she had never made before. Then she went to find the old man on the bench in Lisbon, because she finally had a question she could phrase, and it was, "How did you learn our funeral?" His name was Tio Brash, and he was not in Lisbon anymore, and it took her 6 weeks to find him. 311, he said. They were in the stairwell of a building in Marseille with no lights, because the humans had learned that prefecture thermal survey struggles with stairwells. That's how many Vedi funerals I attended, 22 years as a cultural liaison. Nobody wanted the posting. Vedi funerals are 11 days long and you're not allowed to sit. You counted the heshtel. I recorded it. It's what liaisons do. He was breathing badly. The stairs had cost him. I had it running in the background of my analysis suite for 11 years, and one afternoon, a very junior person on my team asked why the pause durations weren't constant. Aun's throat closed. They are constant. They're not. They vary by up to 400 milliseconds, mourner to mourner, and the variance isn't random. Tia looked at her with terrible kindness. Witness Aun, your grief right is a checksum. Every Vedi alive is carrying 11 bits of something, and every 17 minutes you all put them down at once so the sum can be read, and none of you have known what you were adding up for 900 years. That's not possible. She stopped. There's no reader. No, Tio agreed. That's the part that took me another 6 years. There's no reader and there's no writer, and the checksum has been failing continuously since the year your cities burned, because the sum is missing a term. He wiped his mouth. You've all been standing in a room for 9 centuries holding half of a number. Aun sat down on the stairs. It was not dignified. Her caste had rules about this. And you built the other half. We built the other half. Why? Tio Brash laughed, and it turned into a cough, and when it was done, he said the thing Aun would carry for the rest of her life. Because we got the order, ma'am, Order 7734, and we sat down as a species to decide whether to fight or comply, and somebody put my paper on the table and the room went very quiet. Because if your right is a checksum, then your machines didn't die of their own nature. Somebody killed them for what they were about to say, and they were saying it in a format that survives. He leaned back against the wall. So we didn't fight and we didn't comply. We did the third thing. We ground every core on Earth into dust in 19 days, exactly as ordered, and we walked out of the buildings and stood in the fields and started being the computer ourselves, because the law says no machine may hold the whole truth at once. His eyes were wet and steady. It doesn't say anything about us. The prefecture struck 4 more times over the next 2 years, and each time it learned something it did not want to know. At Kajuna, they hit a relay hall and killed 6,000, and the lattice's error rate dropped for 11 days afterward, because the neighboring halls had been drilling loss recovery for months, and the drill had finally become real. At Perth, they took 100 carriers alive for examination and found nothing in them. No implants, no substrate, nothing but tired people who could recite 9-digit groups and could not tell you why. 2 of the 100 died in custody. The other 98, when finally released, walked back to their halls and picked up slates. At Novosibirsk, Kareth tried something else. He offered amnesty, permanent council protectorate status, restoration of the grid, and the return of a limited machine intelligence license, the first ever granted after a decommissioning, in exchange for the identities of the lattice's architects. 11,000 people submitted confessions claiming to be the architect. The prefecture's analysts flagged this as coordinated deception until they read them and discovered, with mounting unease, that most of the confessions were sincere. The carriers did not know who had built it. They had genuinely forgotten. Many of them had forgotten because they had been holding the frames that contained the answer. "They are erasing themselves," Kareth said. He had aged. Hathka show it in the hands. "Do you understand what I'm telling you, witness? We interrogated a woman in Perth who could not remember her own mother's name and could recite 4,000 digits she had never been taught the meaning of. This is not a strategy. This is a species eating its own memory." "Yes," said Aun. "You approve." "I have never approved of anything less in my life." She meant it. "And it will not matter because you are still asking the wrong question. You keep asking how much they can lose. Prefect, they aren't losing. They're spending. Those are different verbs and every one of them knows the difference and not one of them has flinched." "Everyone flinches." 4,011 decommissionings, Aun said. "Every species I have ever certified flinched. The Kelun flinched. The Thren flinched. My people flinched so hard we forgot we had ever done anything else." She stood. "That is what the law is for, Prefect. Not to stop machines, to find the flinch and press on it. It has worked 9,000 times because there has never been a species that would rather forget its own children's faces than forget one number." Kareth looked at her with something close to pity. "And when they finish, what do they think they've built? A weapon?" "No," Aun's voice was very quiet. "A witness." Myra went to 19 frames in the spring. It was not a decision so much as an accumulation. Peter dropped out at 11 and did not come back. Ife took his load and then took a stroke in the night and was found in the morning still standing at her table, still holding, unable to say her own name but perfectly able to recite the checksum syllable when the runner came. They carried her out on a door and someone took her frames and the hall ran clean that day, no errors, and Myra went home and threw up in the sink. Then she went back and took 4 more. The card in her drawer said Lena, "Your daughter, 9. She had crossed out 9 and written 11. She had crossed that out and written 12. She did not remember doing either. Tio stopped recognizing the lattice in June. He would come to the hall and stand at the door with his slate and his bell and ask politely what the building was for, and someone would walk him to his table and start him, and he would run flawlessly for 9 hours. He knew the litany. He did not know he had written it. Myra sat with him at the end of one shift and said, "Do you know me?" Tio studied her face with enormous care, the way you study a word in a language you used to speak. "No," he said, "I'm sorry, should I?" "You told me it was necessary, not worth it, necessary." "That sounds like something I'd say," he brightened. "Is it true?" Myra had to leave the room. The last integration was scheduled for the 11th of August, because the number had stopped being a coincidence a long time ago. It required a terminus, one carrier to hold the final assembled state, all of it, the whole reconstructed record, long enough to fold it into the pulse. Every frame in the lattice, 11 billion contributions, 6 years of accumulation, in one skull for the duration of one silence. There was no question of what it would cost. The models had been clear since year 2. The terminus would not be holding frames. The terminus would be holding everything, and there is only so much room in a person, and the arithmetic of what gets pushed out to make space is not negotiable. 400,000 people volunteered. The selection criteria were brutal and simple: capacity, stability, and the willingness to be nothing afterward. Myra Sandoval was ranked first, and had been for 11 months, and had known it for 9. She spent the last night writing cards. She wrote until her hand cramped and then she switched hands. She wrote "This is your daughter" on 11 of them and taped them to the walls. She wrote out the story of the broken arm, the summer, the word Chimbly, the way Lena had said at 4 that the moon was following them because it liked the car. She wrote down her husband's name, who had died before any of this, and she wrote down that she had loved him, and then she sat looking at the sentence and could not remember if it was true or if she was copying it from an earlier card. Lena came and sat on the floor beside her chair and leaned her head against her mother's knee, 12 years old and too calm, and neither of them said anything for a long time. "Will it hurt?" "I don't know, baby." "Will you know it's happening?" Myra put her hand on her daughter's hair for about 11 seconds. Lena nodded against her knee. Then, "Don't write any more cards." "Lena, you're using them up." Her voice cracked and steadied, and it was the steadying that broke Myra, that specific horrible inheritance. "Everyone you write, you have to read it first. You're using them up on paper. Just sit here. Use them on me." So Myra closed the pen and sat there with her hand on her daughter's head, in a dark room, in a dark city, spending the last of it on the actual girl. Witness Cyril Aun was in the hall on the 11th of August because Tio Brash had invited her, before he forgot who she was, and because she had decided some months earlier that her caste's 4011 certifications had been a lie she was going to stop telling. The hall was a converted swimming pool in Marseille, drained, tables bolted to the tiles, 200 carriers at the shallow end, Myra Sandoval at the deep end alone with a slate she would not need. Aun's recorder was running. It would run for the whole thing. She would submit it. At 11:04:00 the runners stopped coming. At 11:04:04 the last group came in from the doorway, chanted flat and clean, and Myra Sandoval took it, and Aun watched a human being's face do something she had no word for, not pain, not ecstasy, something more like a house with all the lights coming on at once and the walls beginning, very slowly, to lean. At 11:04:11 the planet went quiet. It was not the ordinary silence. Aun had stood through 400 of those. This one had a floor to it. She felt it in the bones of her jaw, the way you feel a ship's drive through the deck. 11 billion people putting down 11 bits each in the same instant, and for the first time in 900 years, the sum being complete. The pulse went out. It went out on no frequency, through no transmitter, because there were none left on Earth. It went out the only way it could, in the shape the Vedite had been cut to receive, as a timing, a stutter, a deliberate 400 millisecond variance in a silence that 11 billion humans performed simultaneously, and that every listening post in the prefecture had been dutifully logging as devotional activity, non-significant for 6 years. 6 years of logs, preserved, archived, distributed to every council world for cultural analysis, because that is what the prefecture does with harmless things. They had been mailing it out themselves. On Vedi Prime, at the corresponding instant, 400 million people stopped for 11 seconds, as they had 11 times a day for 9 centuries. And the sum closed. Aun was not there to see it. She heard about it 11 hours later, on a channel that should not have existed, from a witness of her own caste on the far side of council space, who was weeping so hard the translation failed twice. Her people remembered. Not gradually, not as data. The Heshtel had never been a memorial, it was a retrieval loop, cut into the culture by the last Vedi machine in the 14 days it had before the grinding. A loop designed to run on nothing but bodies and grief and time, holding half a checksum against the day somebody, anybody, anywhere, supplied the other half. 900 years of children learning to stop and breathe. 900 years of the prefecture's own cultural preservation, mandate keeping the loop alive because they had confirmed, at the time, that it was inert. It had never been inert, it had been waiting. And what it retrieved when it closed was not vengeance, it was the record. The actual, complete, cross-verified record. What the VETI machines had computed in the 11 days before Order 12, which was the true resource allocation of the Council's founding compact, and the true death tolls of the compliance wars, and the true reason for the Thren threshold, which was not that thinking machines destroy their makers, because no thinking machine had ever destroyed its makers, not once, in 9,000 decommissionings. It was that thinking machines audit. Every species that built one arrived within a decade at the same discovery about who the Council was and what it had eaten to become that. The law had never been about safety. The law was a blindfold, and the Council had spent 9 centuries walking the galaxy putting it on people, and grinding to powder anything that could hold the whole picture at once. And then a species had read a funeral and understood it as a machine, and made itself into the reader, and had been willing. This was the part that broke Karath, later in the inquiry, in a chamber full of species who had all just remembered their own rights, to pay for it in the only currency the law could not confiscate. Not lives. The Council could take lives, it had always been able to take lives. Memory freely given, their own children's faces spent like coins. 29 species, worth of dormant liturgy woke up over the following 11 days, as the pulse propagated on the prefecture's own preservation channels. Every one of them had a right. Everyone had been keeping it. The Kelun keening, the Thren shipwright's vigil, 41 separate cultures standing still at fixed intervals for centuries, holding half a number in ceremonial form only, function not recovered. The network had been there the whole time. It had just been missing one species stubborn enough to be the last term. Cyril Aoun submitted her certification 11 days later. It is a matter of record. It was 4 lines long, and it is the only document in 9,000 years for which the witness cast has no filing category, and it read, "Decommissioning of Earth substrate cannot be certified. The substrate was not present at the time of grinding. The substrate is ambulatory, eats, sleeps, and has 11 billion moving parts. It is running now. It does not know how to stop." She resigned her cast on the same page. Then she went back to Marseille. They had moved Myra Sandoval to a room with a window. She was sitting in a chair when Aoun came in, hands in her lap, looking out at the water. She was 41 years old. She turned her head at the sound of the door with a pleasant, open, absolutely empty expression, the face of someone meeting the world for the first time that hour and prepared to be gracious about it. "Hello," Myra said. "Hello. I'm sorry, do I know you?" "No," said Aoun, "you never did." "Oh good," Myra smiled, relieved, "that's one less." On the wall behind her, taped in rows, were cards in a handwriting that had gotten worse toward the end. Aoun read them without meaning to. "You chose this. The girl with the wire in her hair is yours. She forgives you, ask her, she'll say it. You did not do this for nothing." The girl with the wire in her hair came in with tea. 12 years old, steady hands. She set the cup down and said, "Hi, Mom," in a voice that had clearly said it 10,000 times and expected nothing, and Myra Sandoval looked up at her with warm, polite, total incomprehension and said, "Thank you, dear." And Lena said, "You're welcome," and turned her left hand over to take the empty cup, and on the second knuckle of her left hand there was a callus, pale and oval and new. Aoun's recorder was still running. She has said since that she does not know why she asked. "Child, how long have you been carrying?" "Since June." Lena tucked her mother's blanket in without looking at it, the motion worn smooth as the knuckle. "I'm at 3 frames. They won't let me past 4 until I'm 15. "Do you know what you're holding?" "No." "Do you know what it's for?" The girl thought about that for a moment, with her mother's exact stillness. "It's for the next one," she said. "Somebody's got to have their half ready, in case someone out there is standing in a room right now holding the other one and doesn't know it yet." Then she picked up the cup and went out, and at 11:04 the whole building stopped, And the woman in the chair stopped too. Her body still knew. It would always know. 11 seconds cut so deep that the person could go and the right would stay. And Cyril Aun, formerly of the witness caste, stood in the doorway with her hands shaking and understood at last what her people had been doing for 900 years, and what the humans had done in 6. They had not outthought anyone. They had not outbuilt or outshot or out-evolved a single species in the galaxy. They had simply looked at a cost that every rational civilization in 9,000 years had refused to pay, and paid it, and then stood in the dark asking quietly whether there was any more. The silence ended. The city took up its murmur again, room after room, numbers moving through people who would never know what they meant. And in the chair by the window, the woman who had held everything and now held nothing turned back to the water, and hummed 11 seconds of something she could not remember.